He was looking for the remains of a judge. Some guy who disappeared a long time ago. Joseph Crater.
Is it possible to erase all traces of a man?
Well, this is still America, right?
Nobody has ever come up with a fully definitive theory of what happened to him. My own hunch is he took money from two sides, and one of them got very, very mad at him.
The more I look into the Crater case, the more I think it's a special moment in New York. That whole twilight world of gangsters and politicians, Crater's right in the middle of it. This is what I keep behind my desk. Anybody says I'm obsessed, he bears an uncanny resemblance to Herbert Hoover in some ways.
Everybody's heard of Judge Crater.
Yeah.
And your name is?
Morgan.
Do you know that we're literally at the site where Crater vanished? Take a picture of this.
Before Jimmy Hoffa, Judge Crater was the guy that everybody referred to. He pulled the Judge Crater. He disappeared. The guy just disappeared on the face of the earth.
Who's that?
Judge Crater. How should I know?
The one ordered the house arrest?
Answer the door. It's a goddamn expression.
On August 6, 1930, a new play, Dancing Partner, got a good review in the New York Times. A Mr. Joseph Force Crater wanted a ticket to that night's show. He withdrew tens of thousands of dollars from the bank that afternoon and disappeared that evening, never to be seen or heard from again. Crater became a piece of American lore. He was sitting by appointment as a justice of the New York State Supreme Court. Judge Crater, call your office, became the joke of the day. Crater's NYPD case is number 13595. His body has yet to be found, so the farce of Judge Crater's vanishing endures 80 years later.
I think that the endlessly fascinating part of the Crater case is that I don't expect a final answer, and I think you can build up a lot of evidence for your theory that there is a possibility that this is much bigger than it seems. I also think there's a possibility that this is much smaller than it seems.
Vanishing of Judge Crater, no.
You never heard of him?
No.
Let's get on that. We don't want the wheels coming off the wagon.
Let me handle it. I'll take care of it, all right?
Connect the guy, the wise guy, to Skipper the boss.
Maybe there are no more deals to be had. Maybe this is coming apart.
So, you know, you're heading toward where Judge Crater vanished.
I'm waiting for the same cab, I guess.
We start out with certain basics about Crater. He was a Tammany judge, which meant you could talk to him, which is a word they used to use. Can I talk to him? Which meant that he was on the take. The guy who introduced you to Crater had to be paid off. The secretary had to be paid off. These were complicated deals. They were all under the table. They were all in cash. You wanted to do business in the city, you had to find a friend who was going to negotiate for you.
So my grandfather...
Your grandfather was part of the apparatus.
And to the best of your knowledge, where's Judge Crater? Ask Maurice Bloch.
In all the 5 boroughs, unknown. Forget about it.
I happened to learn of Judge Crater's legend while with my grandmother. It blew my mind when I realized that my grandfather worked with him. My grandfather, Maurice Bloch, was the Democratic State Assembly leader from 1924 until his sudden death at only 38 in 1929. He was a campaign strategist for Al Smith, FDR, and my mother's Uncle Bob U.S. Senator Robert F. Wagner, who I later learned hired Crater as his aide years after befriending Bloch. By 1929, Crater and Bloch had been involved on big deals for most of the decade. Yet, Bloch spent his spare time founding the Park Avenue Synagogue, whereas Crater spent his spare time as a dancing Joe at West Side clubs with rogues. Hence, Crater was thought to have vanished by horning in on the wrong gal.
Your grandfather was part of the apparatus. It was a very powerful apparatus that made itself a lot of money.
You know, I grew up with my mother's side of the family, the history hidden from me. And, you know, to find out something as sensational as these things and find out that your grandfather, you know, about the song The Little Tin Box on Broadway, and you know about Fiorello, but then all of a sudden to find out your grandfather was the campaign manager and he was the keeper of the Little Tin Box is, you know, comes as quite a shock.
A little tin box, a little tin box that a little tin key unlocks. There is nothing unorthodox about a little tin box. About a little tin box. About a little tin box. In a little tin box, a little tin box that a little tin key unlocks. There is honor and purity, lots of security in a little tin box.
It was a system of government that's hard for us to contemplate today. But in those days, it was normal.
Gentlemen, how about some names we can use? Some qualified Republican who's willing to lose.
They controlled the executive, the legislative, and the judicial branches.
Pretty much. I guess I'd say that's a fair estimate.
Manhattan's Democratic organization was known as Tammany Hall. It was a political association of such unique power that its leaders could get virtually anyone, any job, in any branch of government at any time. Their slate of countywide candidates, whether borough president, district attorney, registrar, sheriff, county clerk, and their judges, was contested by Republicans, but Tammany invariably prevailed. Tammany Hall was structured to get out the vote. Election district captains reported to club presidents. Club presidents reported to state assembly district leaders. Lording over the district leaders were the sachem. Tammany's origins were rooted with Native Americans indigenous to the Delaware Valley. Their mascot was the tiger. These sachem, who buffered the district leaders from the chief, were either commissioners of some municipal franchise or a prominent public office holder. On July 4th, 1929, FDR helped dedicate Tammany's new wigwam.
He had a very anomalous relationship with Tammany Hall. He needed them, but wanted to keep them at arm's length. It was a very difficult relationship.
I need a person who's going to reflect my politics.
Alfred E. Smith won 1928's Democratic presidential nomination handily. Smith was an Irish Catholic from Manhattan's infamous Democratic machine, Tammany Hall. Tammany Hall got Al elected New York's governor 4 times. Its goal in 1928 was to secure New York's electoral votes, the most in the nation, for Smith. Toward that end, Tammany drafted Franklin Delano Roosevelt to run for governor. FDR was an upstate Protestant, and Smith was a city Catholic. Tammany felt that pairing the two would put Smith over the top. FDR got more total votes in New York than did Smith. That Smith didn't win New York was not FDR's fault. FDR campaigned hard for him. Ultimately, Smith was done in by those who tarnished him as beholden to the Pope. Still, Smith anticipated that FDR would keep him on as a senior advisor. But FDR ran well ahead of Smith in upstate Republican regions. To be elected president, FDR wouldn't engage Tammany Hall the way Smith did. The men in these home movies were FDR's transition team. All of them gave 100% of their time working in 1928 for a Smith-FDR sweep. They and others worked on both campaigns, some to the point of exhaustion. This footage of New York Democratic leaders was taken at Warm Springs, Georgia. FDR hosted legislative conferences soon after his election. They owed their careers to Tammany and Smith, but they saw that FDR won New York voters that Smith never tried to reach. Up until then, Smith was Tammany's operative in Albany, but with his so-called retirement, could FDR's men temper Tammany's sense of entitlement over Manhattan's civic franchises?
A toast. A toast. A toast. Come on, toast. Frank, he made it. All right? King of New York. The King of New York. King.
So as you're saying, there's log rolling going on.
Yeah.
But now different people are going to be positioned up the ladder differently.
No doubt about it.
With regard to who's going to get what.
No doubt about it.
And my grandfather could have been caught in the middle somehow.
He could have been caught in the middle. I would have no argument with that. He could be attached to one group and trying to maneuver to the other group and leave one group behind and curry favor with Roosevelt, who was a rising star, as leaving Smith behind, who was a descending star. Absolutely possible.
He might have been trying to burn the candle at both ends.
Absolutely possible.
He might have been obliged to in his position as the Tammany's leader.
He might have had to.
It was an awkward position.
Very awkward. And it was anybody caught between Smith and Roosevelt at that point, it was an awkward position.
Roosevelt came to power as governor. Everything changed in New York. It was a tidal change. Tammany became very secondary. They were lucky if they got some crumbs every now and then.
So my grandfather's influence as leader changed.
Absolutely.
On August 6, 1930, Roosevelt, as governor, requested all of Manhattan DA Thomas C.T. Crane's evidence regarding Mr. George Ewald, a Tammany regular from Morningside Heights. Allegedly in 1927, Ewald's then wife got $10,000 to his district leader, Mr. Martin Healy. The so-called loan came after Ewald, one of Healy's election district captains, was promoted to a municipal judgeship. Tammany's district leaders routinely secured judgeships for club members, but Ewald's so-called loan to Healy came so soon after his promotion that it looked like Ewald bought the seat from Healy. On August 6, 1930, the same day that FDR requested Ewald's evidence from Crane regarding Healy, Mayor Jimmy Walker suspended Healy from his day job as the city's deputy commissioner of plants and structures.
There's no question they were corrupt. That was the morals of the time. Those are the standards of the time. That what is considered corrupt behavior at one time was considered relatively legitimate at another time. Or, if not legitimate, still so widespread that to prosecute it would be considered an injustice.
I need you to marry yourself to this guy.
It's not signed and sealed, but it is delivered. And you were the closer.
The Irish leadership of Tammany, John Curry, he and his faction decided they wanted to give something to the Italians, and there was a price to be paid by Bertini because judgeships rarely went without some contributions, if you know what and Maurice Bloch was asked to nominate him. But it was smart to have Maurice Bloch do it at that time.
This guy, Amadeo Bertini. You ever hear that name?
Sounds a little familiar, but I don't know why.
So, my grandfather, in essence, said they want him on the bench early. He can be hearing cases.
Mm-hmm.
And he can run as an incumbent. He had real estate interests, and he was good friends with Humbert Fugazi.
Well, he was connected.
Someone had to apply pressure to Roosevelt to have him select Crater.
Yes. Yes.
State Attorney General Hamilton Ward, a Republican, wrote FDR, a Democrat, as to how FDR came to appoint two judges. One was Crater, who was missing, and the other was Amadeo Bertini, Crater's friend, who was largely considered unqualified for a county judgeship. FDR replied that both Tammany Hall and the New York County Bar Association pre-approved of Crater for the state Supreme Court. More important, that Maurice Bloch, FDR's very good friend of sterling character and unquestioned integrity, saw Bertini, given the circumstances, as fit for the place on the New York County Court. It has made me wonder why, if my grandfather was so important to FDR, why FDR would name him in the same letter as the now farcical judge.
A short sojourn to Albany, followed by a long one at the White House.
You're the future of the Democratic Party, and you always will be.
I'm sure people were racing to get into Maurice Bloch's papers after he died. Let's get everything out of here we can that we don't want anybody else seeing. And there's that whole feeling with Crater in his apartment. People going in and out of his apartment before the police are notified that he's gone. And there are those papers that never show up that he takes out of his chambers.
The fact is that Maurice Bloch was in a powerful position. However, as a loyal Tammanyite, he might have had to oppose the nomination of Roosevelt at Chicago in 1932 and support Al Smith instead.
We do know there was considerable money to be made out of that Libby Bass trusteeship bankruptcy. That's about pretty much what we know. The actual inner workings, we don't really know.
But we know that my grandfather was involved. I have a trail of separate and apart corrupt schemes that involved both my grandfather and Crater.
Just a minute. We know there was a lot of corruption. But the Libby thing, there was more money involved in that than any other little Tammany tidbit. The receiver was in charge of the operation, and he got a sizable payoff for that.
I've never read the same description of the Libby matter, the same description in two different places. Somebody always has a different, that his role as the receiver, Crater's role there, that he was absolutely corrupt, he wasn't corrupt.
Where do you think that he might be?
Well, recently there have been articles that they thought he was in Brooklyn somewhere, and I think they did some excavation work to try and find remains, and I don't know whatever came of that.
Judge Crater still makes the news, but in 2005 he made the front pages. A deathbed letter stated that he was buried under Coney Island's boardwalk, but he hasn't turned up in Brooklyn yet. When a sinkhole opened at the corner of Christie and Delancey Streets just days before 9/11, however, Crater made news too. In February of 1929, Libby's Baths, a spa on that site, went into foreclosure. Crater was made the hotel's foreclosure receiver. People wanted the sinkhole searched for Crater's remains before it was sealed. This Libby's theory on Crater's vanishing has its investors killing him and ditching him in the sinkhole. Ultimately, the hole was sealed, but I don't think investors took him out. After all, FDR wanted to be president, and he had just made Crater a judge. Vanishing Crater meant making FDR accountable. It's not as if FDR wanted to write that letter. Joe Crater became receiver in Libby's foreclosure because Wagner, Bloch, and several others wanted him there. Bloch, as assembly leader, may not have known about Healy's loan, but he knew Healy. Thomas C.T. Crane resigned the bench in August of 1929 to run for DA at Jimmy Walker's request. FDR was obliged to replace him by December 31st, 1929. Maurice Bloch died suddenly on December 5th, 1929, amid reports that forces did not want FDR to replace Crane with Bloch. After Bloch's death, FDR's choice of John Francis Carew surprised Tammany Chief John Francis Curry. Then, in April, FDR named Joseph Force Crater on Wagner's advice to the next vacancy. Weeks after that, the court adjourned for the summer, and before it resumed in late August, Crater's leader, Martin Healy, was being probed about Ewald's loan, and Judge Bertini was on deck. He withdrew $100,000 from his accounts soon after Bloch nominated him. Accordingly, the question is, was Crater wanted because of his knowledge of the Healy loan, or because he was the go-between Bertini and Bloch?
You think it has to do with Crater as the receiver of the Libby?
That's the only thing, that there was enough money involved to make murder a likely aspect of it.
Crater, the bagman for transactions between my grandfather and Wagner?
Yeah.
The bond issue has payoffs for many people. The underwriters of the bond, even the printers of the bonds. There are all kinds of arrangements. All of it was crooked. You weren't supposed to do it that way. But there were payoffs, and they was done that way.
A lot of money in bond issues. New York under Roosevelt and under Smith and with Robert Moses became probably one of the prime areas for bond issues in the United States. Probably was on a level with the federal government at that point.
So different people are going to be positioned up the ladder differently.
No doubt about it.
With regard to who's going to get what.
No doubt about it.
And my grandfather could have been caught in the middle somehow.
He could be attached to one group and trying to maneuver to the other group and leave one group behind, and curry favor with Roosevelt, who was a rising star, as leaving Smith behind, who was a descending star. Absolutely possible.
It was an awkward position.
Very awkward. And it was anybody caught between Smith and Roosevelt at that point, it was an awkward position.
Dear Frank, have you the figures ready for EM? Dear Maury, I would suggest that you see EM. Dear Frank, EHM is waiting for your figures on bond issue.
Well, he was in the bond business himself for a while.
So
FDR was not a saint.
I would absolutely go along with everything you've said about the possibilities for your grandfather's involvement in this bond issue, the probability that there was this back scenes wheeling and dealing and arguing and trying to maneuver between Roosevelt and Smith on the bond issue. But I think it's, making the case from that to murder.
But why would my grandfather use code? Why would he say, I have to have you the figures for EM, I have to have another talk with EM?
We will never know.
there was an evaporation of the revenue from the bond issue. As a result, Bloch was on, the hook to somebody for something. He had made one too many obligations.
Yeah, well, whether he had made too many political promises or whether he had a financial obligation to somebody, whether he'd been taking money to do something that he now couldn't do. Again, it's speculation. It could be or it couldn't be, but we'll never know. You believe your grandfather was murdered, right?
I think it's a possibility. I see all that money up in the air, and so my theory, it's plausible.
Why what?
That my grandfather died unnaturally. I find doctors today that
Could be. It would not surprise me. Period. That way. Could be.
Well,
But I would say this: Tammany was able to operate with a minimum of violence. Violence is troublesome, raises questions, investigations.
Was there a complete autopsy? Did he have any signs of heart trouble before that?
No.
What kind? Was he overweight?
Do you know that there was a question mark on his death certificate?
Was he overweight?
No. I mean, he's a 38-year-old guy, and he just...
I would say if somebody's going to the trouble of murdering a prominent political figure and they were intent on covering up, there wouldn't have been a question mark on your grandfather. They would have made it look so convincing that there wouldn't have been a question. Even when your grandfather died, if he wasn't murdered, just the amount of business that was floating out there that people would try to get a hold of, who was going to get his job, where he would go, what's going on with this bond issue, and then soon after that, of your grandfather's death, the fact that Crater disappears, there's all these moving pieces.
Do you think that there's something that was going on that overshadowed my grandfather's death so strongly that Crater had to vanish, that something had to happen to somebody, and Crater was the person?
I think it's hard for me to make a definite statement on why Judge Crater disappeared. It certainly was aromatic.
Frankie, I got these people to trust you.
Our money is just as good as theirs.
With or without you, I'm gonna get rid of Frank. Okay? So now you know.
I I worked in the civil service, and people always talking about, they always had two things, my contract and my rabbi.
Who was his rabbi?
Wagner.
The senator.
Same as my grandfather's.
Well, I mean, he was a pretty strong rabbi to have.
FDR returns to New York and replaces Bloch with Carew on December 24th. On January 2nd, FDR sees Jimmy Hines, the Assembly District leader who tangled with Bloch.
A guy like Jimmy Hines who could control the appointments to two Supreme Court judges.
In March, FDR writes to Judge Carew regarding his upcoming visit with Wagner.
Senator.
Later in April, FDR writes to Walter Lippmann of The World, saying that he thinks that Crater will be an excellent choice. Wagner then writes Smith about his new partnership. Curry, later, with Bloch out of the picture, writes to FDR explaining why FDR is not going to be the 1932 Democratic presidential candidate.
Well, he collapsed. They think he had a heart attack.
No, there was no heart attack.
This will not stand, you know? This aggression will not stand.
No, wait. We need a more permanent solution to our problem.
Oh, Judge! Oh, Mr. Judge! Oh, Judge!
Please! Take it easy, baby. I'll be back.
Crater's last words to me as he was leaving chambers were, "Fred, lock up for the night."
For the police admit their failure to unearth one single clue as to the whereabouts of the missing candidate.
I never heard my grandfather mention Crater's name. I don't think I ever heard my father mention Crater's name. So I don't know.
Crater, who befriended Bertini, was missing. Bloch, who nominated Bertini, was dead. Wagner, after returning from a European cruise to learn of Crater's vanishing, dismissed any suggestions that he was ever close with Crater. Yet, Crater bragged that Wagner wouldn't know what to do without him. It was Bloch, however, who buffered Wagner from Crater, and by extension Bertini, and that was just the tip of Wagner's iceberg. When Wagner had FDR appoint Crater, both knew that with Bloch's death, Crater was more a sitting duck than a sitting judge. After all, when Tammany's newspaper, the New York Democrat, reported Crater's vanishing, they noted that it didn't surprise everyone.
And let's just say I'm guilty but not responsible.
Changed up the word for it, Senator. We're back in the gym.
I'm just saying you're reaching.
It could well be.
You've such a hate on Manhattan lately that you'd gladly die. Your conversation excites me greatly, for so have I. I'm tired of the telephone always ringing. I'm tired of hearing Rudy Varley singing. I'm tired of the Paramount's gaudy gilding. I'm tired of looking up to the Chrysler building. I'm tired of having Texas Garland greet me. Tired of having Grover Whalen meet me. There's only one solution, dear. Let's calmly disappear.
I'll be alone each and every night. While you're away, don't forget to write. Bye-bye, so long, farewell. Bye-bye, so long. See you in September. See you when the summer's through. Here we are, bye, baby, goodbye. Saying goodbye at the station. Bye, baby, goodbye. Summer vacation is taking you away. Bye, baby, have a good time, but remember there is danger in the summer moon above. Will I see you in September or lose you to a summer love? Counting the hours and the minutes too. Bye, baby, goodbye. Bye, baby, goodbye. Bye, baby, goodbye.
Is it possible to erase all traces of a man?
People's memories aren't too long.
It hasn't changed. It hasn't changed at all